button now and give folks a few minutes if they want to make any adjustments to their names or turn off their cameras. So today we have some questions that have been prepared for the panelists. In addition, thanks to those of you who sent in some questions, we're going to try to address those as we're able. But if you have more questions that come up for you as the panelists are speaking, please enter those into chat. RT is going to help us out with the time, making sure that we keep things moving and hold about 20 minutes at the end to answer those additional questions for you. I know we have a variety of people joining us today. Some of you are experienced conveners of SIGs, and others of you are probably maybe just considering starting a SIG. So knowing that we have people kind of at all of those stages, we'll try to touch on topics of interest to all of you. Just as a quick overview of special interest groups at the Society for Social Work and Research, these groups facilitate networking opportunities for conference attendees to discuss in greater depth a specific social work research policy or practice area. We have on any given year about 60 or 70 SIGs that vary a great deal in terms of their activities outside of the conference meeting. So some of the SIGs meet during the conference meeting, and that's really the extent of their activities, and others are very active, as you'll hear from our panelists shortly, with a variety of things going on across the year. Any SWR member can convene a SIG, but you have to apply to do that. The application's pretty simple. And if approved, that gets you space to meet at the conference in person. Typically, of course, this year's a little bit different. And I also want to give a special welcome to Jennifer Lewis, who's joining us today. She's the executive director of SWR. And she asked actually for a couple minutes with us today to talk a little bit about how the SIG meeting format's going to be different this year. So Jennifer, could you give us a quick overview?
Sure, Jen, thanks very much to you and RT for developing this panel. I think it's going to be very valuable for people to know how worthwhile holding a SIG at SWR is in person, and we think virtually it will also be very beneficial. We won't have the SIGs jammed into 2 days. And virtually, I think ultimately more people will be able to attend. So we are just now starting this work of scheduling. DJ Garingo, I'm sure most of you know her. And the plan for the SIGs, and there are about 60 this year, is to spread them out over starting the week of February 8th through mid-May. And there are likely to be possibly 4 to 5 SIGs scheduled each week. Again, there are 60 of them, so we need to utilize the time that we have. We will be sending out today to a small number of SIGs that we'd like to try and schedule in the next couple of weeks. Now, we know that unlike when we meet in person, you know that you're going to be scheduled either Thursday or Friday, rather Friday and Saturday of the conference. So you plan that into your schedule. We know that this is not necessarily on your calendar yet. So we'll be going to send out an email with the dates that we are suggesting. And then you will have an opportunity after discussing it with your co-conveners, what would work for you. If not the time we've suggested, it will be a survey monkey with giving you some options to reply. So we are going to be asking that one person of a SIG, one co-convener, organize amongst their co-conveners so that we have one point of contact. That would be very helpful. So this will be on the conference platform. So it does mean that registrants will be invited to participate. we do have to set it up so that we can continue to use our virtual platform that we feel worked very well for the conference. It does need to be, we need to have a gatekeeper for people who want to attend the SIGs. I mean, when we do and we'll be doing lots of promotion to let people know when the SIGs are happening. And this will be going out to we had more than 1,900 people register for the conference. So which is typically in person, we have 2,000 to 2,150. So we have a very large pool to promote the SIGs to. So those are the basics. It will be on Zoom, a meeting just like this. We will not be taking pre-registration, so we will not be able to tell you in advance how many people are attending. But we will be able to track who did attend your SIGs, which will be an advantage. So if you want to communicate with them afterwards, you'll have their name and email addresses. So that's the basic information I have now. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them. No?
I have a question.
Yes.
If you could just make it explicit, would people be able to participate in a SIG who hadn't registered for SWR or were not able to attend?
No, we are keeping it limited to people who have registered for SWR. Again, it's just we have to have control for security reasons. It's not about the cost, for security reasons that we know who can enter the site. And we're not taking like a separate registration for each SIGs. It just, from an administrative point of view, we don't have that capacity to do that. Now, just to let people know, and we'll be sending another listserv to all of our members, that registration is available through February 5th. So there may be some people who are willing to register. It is a reduced cost compared to our in-person meeting, because there's going to be a huge amount of content available virtually over the next 9 months. In addition to the 60 SIGs, we will have 35 of the abstract-based workshops, which were not presented during the 3-day virtual meeting, and those are of considerable value of the content that they'll be disseminating. Those workshops will be 90 minutes. And in addition to that, we'll also be holding poster forums, which is a new format, so that we'll have 28 virtual poster forums, again, over this long period of time, where our cluster chairs, who will kind of facilitate a conversation with poster presenters, again, those people who are able to join, and we'll spread them out also. And so I'm going a little bit more than what you asked me for, but I'm trying to explain that registering, there's value added because of all these additional sessions that people will be able to participate in over the next 8-9 months. No, thanks for the thumbs up there. Any other questions? I mean, we're excited about this. It's again, the board was very put a lot of thought into this so that the 3-day virtual meeting would be manageable, but we could still have all this other content available to our members. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'm also going to put a link to the SWR website that has a little bit more information about SIGs, including the process for requesting to convene one and the reporting that goes along with that if you are approved as a SIG convener. And with that, I'd like to launch into the discussion with our panelists. And first, I am hoping each one of you will give an overview of the focus of your special interest group and the kinds of activities that your special interest group organizes. So first, if it's okay, I'd like to start with Dr. Lightfoot.
Sure. So, hi, everybody. It's great to see so many people interested in SIGs here. I have been involved in 2 SIGs, actually, the disability SIG and also the doctoral education SIG. But I'll just talk about the disability SIG for now. So we started this back in 2008 when there was very little disability content research going on at SWR. And you know, to start it up, you just submit a form. So I just did it with one of my colleagues, and we thought we should do this. We didn't really know much about what we were doing when we did this to start with. There weren't 60 at the time, but there was a number of them. And we essentially try to provide support and networking opportunities for people who are interested in disability research. And we meet at SWR, and then we have tried a variety of ways over the years to stay connected, ranging from listservs and Google groups to, we tried LinkedIn for a while. That was a big failure. We now have a Facebook page where we connect with people. And we've done a lot of work at really trying to make disability researchers more connected. So every year, you know, when the SWR call for proposals comes out, we network amongst each other, trying to think about who wants to do symposiums or workshops. We pass out grant announcements, and there's been a lot of collaboration that's come out of this. Say what else? We, you know, it's grow. The other thing we did is we used it as an advocacy forum. So disability used to be sort of put together with health as a cluster. And so the people who focus on disabilities usually don't like that. And so we advocated for this over a number of years, and we finally got disability to be its own cluster. And then we can promote the disability cluster through the disability SIG. And so everybody, the cluster chairs, I was one of the first cluster chairs, works with the SIG to get the information out, because that's the only way we really have to connect with disability researchers. And there's a lot of doctoral students who join this and then become faculty. And so it's sort of nice to see the progression of disability researchers. And now we have a pretty big group. Is that what you're looking for?
That was perfect. Thank
Okay.
you. Dr. Trahan, I'll invite you next to give an overview of your SIG and activities.
Sure. My name is Dr. Mark Trahan. I'm from Texas State University. The picture behind me is actually my 4-year-old daughter, who I couldn't find a better picture other than a personal one, but I figured that would probably remind you of what I'm here to talk about. So I'm one of the 3 co-conveners for the fatherhood-related research SIG. And the other conveners are Dr. Tova Walsh at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Dr. Atima Doyle, University of Illinois at Chicago. And the 3 of us currently in leadership, unfortunately, we are very much indebted to our current leader who's leading this panel, Dr. Jennifer Bellamy, who actually started this SIG to begin with. And so she had a huge impact on where we are as a SIG. And I'll tell you the kind of the brief history and what we do in the SIG, but the fatherhood-related research SIG focuses in on generally underrepresented and under-researched and vulnerable fathers, and particularly in families and family systems in which fathers are an important participant, even if they're non-resident. So a lot of our research focuses on vulnerable fathers, incarcerated fathers, non-resident fathers, low-income fathers, fathers of color. And we had a variety of symposia from this past SWR. I think we had 6 symposia, which when Dr. Bellamy, I think, started this, the father researchers were very few and hard to find. But over the course of developing the SIG, it's actually provided a larger exposure level for researchers to notice other fatherhood-related researchers and then build these relationships. So it's actually developed a really nice community. As Dr. Lightfoot mentioned, over time, there has been the development of a listserv, some very similar kinds of mechanisms. We actually have a website that we've developed with fatherhood-related researchers that I'm going to plop into the chat here in a few minutes for you to take a look at. We also have a webinar that we do once a year. It's in its third year, annual year of presentation. And we actually have a fatherhood researcher that chooses to organize that, and then with a team of researchers present that. And usually what we've done is try to provide a forum, not just for research, but also for providers, as well as fathers, to talk a little bit about their experiences. And so it's been a very nice connection between not just the research community, but also providers and then dads themselves, to have a voice about what's going on with vulnerable fathers. And then, we also have a Twitter feed that is not, I run it, and unfortunately lately it has been less active, but we have a Twitter feed as well. So we have a social media presence as well. So that's a little bit about the fatherhood related research SIG. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to invite Dr. Fisher to give an overview of the LGBTQ caucus SIG.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
And welcome everyone. It's nice to see your faces, even if via Zoom. So in the interest of full disclosure, I want to make it clear that I am not currently one of the co-chairs of the LGBTQ caucus SIG. I came in the middle of the caucus's evolution. And so that's kind of my angle for today. Was it had already been started by founder Jim Martin, who is a professor at NYU, and he was kind of carrying the torch by himself for a number of years, and using the SIG space at SWR as just kind of a meeting space. So the caucus kind of existed outside of a SIG. So we were a group that evolved into a SIG from kind of something else. And so I came in and was co-chair with Jim for 6 years. So the group evolved into a more formalized structure. Now there's a full executive board. And so you can see, like, over time, we've gone from just a one-person show kind of trying to hold things together. And as the group got bigger, we realized it needed to be more formalized. So during my 6 years with the caucus, I would say when I look back, I could summarize our activities kind of falling into 4 buckets: scholarship, networking, advocacy, and mentoring. So just a quick word about each of those. Scholarship activities kind of sort of took 2 forms. One of the things we did was we had a partnership with a Taylor and Francis journal, which is the journal of Gay and Lesbian Social Services. We were one of 2 groups that officially, were the official sponsors of the journal. And so we had a close relationship with the TNF reps. They would give reports at each SIG meeting, and we had a lot of talks about sort of creating a publication funnel for that journal. Another way that we supported scholarship was we would send out, and this was something that Jim Martin did, he would create a schedule about 2 weeks before every conference, and he would send out every single session related to LGBTQ content, not just with folks affiliated with the SIG, but anything to do with that. So that, and that's scholarship and also, a little bit of a networking function. In the networking area, we really looked at sort of ways to network within the conference space and outside of it. Within the conference space, we held an annual reception when there was funding to do so, which there was ebb and flow on that. We also had an annual mentorship breakfast that started for doc students around the time that I stepped away from the SIG. And then outside the conference spaces, as Liz and Mark have both said, we had a listserv. The listserv was a little bit archaic. We moved it to a new Yahoo group, which was supposed to offer us so much more functionality and a document repository. And we had all these great visions, and truthfully, it brought so many headaches. But, the communication outside the SIG and networking outside the conference space was really important. In terms of advocacy, I can say more about it later if anyone wants to know, but there was advocacy that we did with SWR and with the SWR board. And there was also advocacy that we did related to national issues around LGBTQ populations. And then the last thing, mentoring. This was something that we took on a little bit later in my tenure that I was trying to start up. And frankly, it really got off the ground more with the folks who took over after I left the SIG, but really looking at the ways that we as LGBTQ scholars could help mentor and support that next generation of scholars. So whether it was doc students or early career faculty, through a social event that we could have, or formal mentoring or partnering up. And so, like I said, that's something that really has evolved. But those are the 4 areas that I would say the SIG really encompassed.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite, I'm not sure who wants to speak to this part, but Dr. Farber or Dr. Nessa are giving the overview of the immigrant and refugee SIG.
Well, Mitra and I go way back. And we basically connected around trying to create a symposium at SWIR, if I remember this correctly, and she can certainly chime in. And, you know, at that time, number of years ago, every time you went to SWIR, you looked at your SIG groups and you tried to figure out where you belong, because it depended sort of on your latest scholarship, interest, and so on. And for example, I ended up being torn between, I went to disability. I remember going to Liz Lightfoot's disability SWIR SIG. I went to maternal child health because I had a paper or research project at that time. But as time evolved, Mitra and I connected around the work on immigrants and refugees, creating a symposium to be able to participate in submission, because SWIR itself as an organization has gone through evolution, how papers became accepted, how projects became accepted, and so on. So that's kind of a part of that evolution as well. We also started growing. So one of our challenges in the beginning was how to keep up with all people who wanted to participate in SIG. And we had an experience that one year, Mitra was wonderful. She spent all the time putting on the emails, names, and everything. We emailed out everybody, and we literally got almost nothing back. So we learned very quickly of that, you know, it required to keep up. And then people's schedules change over the years. So it was quite challenging to maintain the group. But over the years, actually, we've been very lucky. A lot of same people started coming back. And the discussion really started to create subgroup. So there are 3 conveners, not just only me, Mitra Nasek, but also we had Mary Held from University of Tennessee at the Nashville campus joined us, because we really need the support of each other periodically to be able to keep up, you know, with maintaining contacts and help to facilitate contacts among people. And so I'm actually going to turn it over to Mitra so she can talk about some of our latest activities, because she has been very instrumental in getting them off the ground.
Thank you, Dr. Farber. So yeah, our SIG was actually established by Dr. Wosuko Kim from University of Buffalo. She convened the SIG until 2016. We took over in 2017. And then we started, at the time that we started, we had 7 members, the first session that we convened. Now we have 145 active members, and in our last SIG, we have 50-something participants that only the introduction took 1 hour. So we grow over the years, and we also tried different strategies, as Dr. Farber briefly mentioned, and other conveners of the other SIGs mentioned. One thing that has been working, I believe so it's working, is our bi-monthly emails. So we have a listserv, and our listserv is open. So everyone who wants can join by adding their name, their email address, and their research interest to our open Google form. And everybody will receive a bi-monthly email, and the email includes some resources about refugees and immigrants, new publications of SIG members. So I'm following every member of 145 members of the SIG on Google Scholar if they have a Google Scholar page. So I get alerts when they publish a new paper, and I add it to our news email. So everybody knows that this person has a new publication. And we have a spotlight section in our newsletter that we introduce one new member and their research interest and their ongoing work as part of the email with their picture, which makes it more connectable, I think. So I think that works well. People can also email us if they want to share resources to be part of the news email. That strategy worked for us. We recently started creating subgroups with the help of Dr. Holt, and each one of us took the lead on one of the subgroups trying to move it forward because we are working on immigrants and refugees, and it's really broad. We distributed a survey among our members asking them what subgroups they believe needs to be created. Based on that, we created 6 different subgroups and people signed up for them. And those subgroups now have conveners and the leads that is assigned to arrange a virtual meeting with the members of that subgroup about possible collaboration, grant writing, manuscript development. We had the meetings, nothing has happened yet out of it that I say like it was very successful. It's very recent, we just did it. Our final subgroup meeting will be in a week from now. But we started this. I wanted us to have social media platforms. I didn't know that we can. So I thought that we need to like have a permission or something. So that I think that would be great. And we recently have a COVID-19 panel discussion arranged by our SIG members. And based on that panel, we wrote a letter of recommendation to SSWR leaders, and we are now publishing that letter in an international social work journal.
Thank you all. I'm actually noticing that my second question to you about leadership structure sort of got folded into your first answer, which is great because our time is sailing away quickly from us, as it always does, it seems, in these great panels. So if I heard correctly, several SIGs often started with one person, but as the activities of the SIG grew and participation grew, it sounds like all of them now have at least 2 or 3 conveners, maybe even something more developed like an executive board, I think Dr. Fisher mentioned. So for those of you that are new to SIGs, something to think about, maybe you can launch on your own, but if you're successful, and we hope you are, you're probably going to need some help pretty quickly. So I'm going to actually move us to our next question. And some of you have touched on a few things already, which is what's been going very well, or what did go very well for you when you were leading, and what has been most challenging. And so I'm going to invite Dr. Fisher to start us off with this one.
Surprising me by changing the order.
Keep you on your toes.
Sure. So again, just putting this in context, these aren't current, successes, but just sort of looking back on my 6 years as co-chair. I'll try to keep it super brief. I was going to say some things that sort of struck me as I was reflecting on things that that we could call wins. Maintaining the partnership with the Taylor and Francis Journal, I think, was a big win. And there were a lot of great things that came out of that, not just to help people, feel encouraged to submit to a particular journal, but for us to have a stake in that journal and that area of scholarship. There was a lot of discussion when I stepped away from the SIG about renaming the name of the journal, because the Journal of Gay and Lesbian Social Services no longer includes, and hasn't for many years, our community and our areas of scholarship. And so, but that was something I would chalk up to a win. We had a partnership with SIG, which is the council at CSWE that meets at APM, and it made sense for us to work, side by side with SIG. We were a lot less formal than SIG. But that partnership made perfect sense. So kind of thinking about strategic partnerships, I thought we did that well. And then the advocacy, I think another thing that I would chalk up as a win that went well, advocacy with the SWR board. So members of our caucus were the folks who advocated for the SWR board to start having gender inclusive aspects to the conference and non-binary bathrooms. So the first year that it happened, it was, the SWR leadership, kind of was running around and finding a bathroom in the basement and taped up a sign that said like, inclusive bathroom or whatever it said, unisex bathroom. And then it got to be more formal where the SWR board, I think, started, really realizing this is something we need to look at as a facilities issue. But that was, from our group's advocacy. Having pronoun options on name tags was something that we were advocating for. And so I, like I said, I would chalk those things up to wins. There were also some growing pains during my time with the caucus. And I would say the communication, I already alluded to it, but that was a huge growing pain. And that's not our growing pain, but that's a technology growing pain. But it still created some challenges with our caucus. Now I see that in the comments, I just was alerted that there's a website which I actually didn't know about. And so if anyone's curious and you want to see how the caucus has evolved in terms of communication, take a look at that website because you can see the executive board there. And so you can see how formalized it's gotten compared to even how it was when I left a couple of years ago. Another growing pain was around membership. As we got bigger, one of the conversations we had was, do we include scholars outside the US? If they can't ever come to SWR, but they still want to be involved, what does that look like? And do we open the doors? And so is this inclusive versus keeping true to the mission? Students, we had a lot of discussion about if this is a group for scholars, everybody's in agreement that doc students are in, but what about MSW students? Are they scholars? Are they practitioners? Are they neither? So there was a lot of discussion about who do we let into the group? And then also the question of growth versus access. We want to let everybody in, so we don't want to have there be a membership fee. But if we had a membership fee, then we could do more activities and more advocacy. And so that was another thing that was kind of a growing pain that we worked through. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Trahan, do you want to add some challenges, successes?
Sure. I think the success of this particular father-related research SIG has been around networking and around creating relationships. So we, in addition to meeting at SWR, we generally have a happy hour where we try to connect. Sometimes it is very well attended, and sometimes it's not. It depends on when it is during the conference. But we generally have a lot of interaction over the course of the conference. And so the networking piece around developing these relationships for fatherhood-related researchers has been extremely successful. From the website that's posted on the chat, where fatherhood-related researchers can see others and their research interests, to our listserv, to the webinar, which actually provides a lot of traction in terms of networking. Because we generally highlight a particular fatherhood-related researcher, or at least one and maybe several. And so that provides an opportunity too for exposure. But I think that the other real strength of having this SIG is that I think that most people really underestimate the importance of doing research within a domain of men within social work. I think this is often a very under-focused on area, and from domestic violence to issues related to financial stability to, you name it, you go down the list of a lot of the issues that we face on a macro level. There is this component of dads that we oftentimes don't discuss in the social work field that's so important and relevant to these social problems. And so I think what it's done is it's pushed the exposure of fatherhood-related research within the field out into the open so that people see that it's important and that it's relevant and that it's worthy of a conversation. And so that in itself, like raising awareness of the research around this, has been a real win. I think the challenge, aside from all of us being very busy and trying to balance how do we continue these relationships within the constraints of our own individual responsibilities, and what does that look like? I think the biggest challenge around this has been how to foster this student participation that has become so important to our SIG. We have students that have become real leaders as doc students in developing websites and being in social media, and we have fostered that, and they have just grown into these incredibly profoundly important members of our SIG. And so how do we continue to foster that over time? And that's, even though it's not really necessarily a weakness, it becomes a source of our attention. Like, how do we continue to get these students engaged and foster them as they grow into their careers? And I think it's a really, really cool thing about the SIG that these students get so much exposure to scholars that have been in the field for some time. So I think that's a really important area to focus on too. That's all I'll say.
Thanks. Dr. Lightfoot, successes, challenges?
Sure. Well, I mean, I said one of our major ones before is that we lobbied to get a disability cluster. And I think sort of the same idea of getting disability research visible in SWIR. When I first started going to SWIR, I'd be on the same panel with the same one other person, and we were the only disability panel for a number of years. And now we put together the same sort of guide that Colleen was talking about, with all the disability related sessions, and send that out. And we have, 60 or 70 now every year. So I always think, when I see that every year, I think, wow, this is great. And I think part of it is the disability SIG, other things too, but that people feel that there's a place for them at SWIR when they go to SWIR. So there's some place they can go and collaborate. So they're more inspired to go to SWIR and submit to SWIR. And we also encourage them to as well. So we provide a forum for people to do that collaboration. And these collaborations certainly have gone way beyond SWIR. So we have had members who met in our SIG who've gone on to collaborate on major federal grants, who've done collaborations, other collaborations, who've written papers together and done research projects together and then sites of projects. So all of that, I think, is a super big success. We also partner with the Disability Commission at CSWE, and we've actually worked on some projects with them as well. I think that sort of goes to some of like the challenges we have, is sort of what other people are talking about, is like, we don't know exactly where to draw the line on what's a SWIR SIG and what's just a bunch of disability researchers and social work getting together. And we've sort of taken that attitude, mainly because, as Jennifer just put in the chat, SWIR doesn't support our SIG. So we don't get money for websites, and we don't get money for support or technical assistance, which is fine. But then we've sort of taken the liberty to make it what we want to. So we always say that this is a SWIR SIG, but when we meet outside of SWIR, aside from the SIG meeting, we have it open to whoever wants to come. A lot of our researchers obviously are going to disability conferences, or the public health conference, or the public policy conference, and they don't necessarily go to SWIR every year, but we don't want to exclude them because of that. And if we did, then they probably wouldn't want to come to SWIR the next time they could. So that's been sort of a challenge. It's also, we haven't been as successful in advocacy. I think it might be coming around right now, but we tried to get SWIR to collect disability stats on people, and that didn't seem to be very popular. Maybe that's coming around. I think I might have seen something. Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong, but because we think that scholars with disabilities are probably one of the most underrepresented groups in social work research, but we don't know, we're just guessing. And then finally, because we're doing this all ourselves, sometimes we get little lags in enthusiasm for doing things, like we're not as organized as the immigrant and refugee group. So we don't have a bi-monthly newsletter. And we've changed leadership a few times. I've sort of stuck with it, but I think like not having the support makes it a little more difficult. So, and we keep trying, we're maybe a step behind the technology. So, you know, we go to Yahoo groups, we just tried that too, Colleen, and that didn't work, and Google groups and Facebook and all of this. So we keep trying, but there's no like I think silver bullet for the right way to communicate with our folks. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Liz. And I actually want to invite Jennifer Lewis to share a couple of comments related that pertain to some of the issues you just raised, Liz.
Yes, Liz, thanks for raising those comments. And at this time, SWOR as an organization and the board values the SIGs very much. We know this is a very important part of the networking and sharing of research, et cetera. At this time, we don't have the resources, say staff, to further support the SIGs or provide those technological tools you mentioned. Not to say, I mean, it's been discussed, you know, Liz, you were on the board several years ago. You know, I think with offering the SIGs, kind of because this is the option that's available to us in 2021, that going forward, now that people are comfortable with a virtual environment, that perhaps we'll be able to offer some more resources, but I can't say that for sure. The other thing I want to mention, and it's kind of a housekeeping detail, but important, is that when we revised our bylaws a couple of years ago, I'm sure that was on everybody's radar, I say that jokingly, with legal advice, the SIGs are considered committees of the corporation or the organization. And by that, it's say you hold a SIG in a given year, then you're considered a committee. If you don't hold it the next year, then you're not considered a committee. And I mention this, obviously it's for protection, legal protection for the SIG conveners and the organization. Say the anti-sexual harassment policy, of course, would apply in any SIG meeting, virtual or otherwise. But we have asked SIG conveners to reply to a really basic set of questions, really so that we can just monitor what else our SIGs do. And we're interested in the information, whether you meet other times of year, have listservs, et cetera, just so we can understand what SIGs are doing, and then perhaps at some point we can further support those. So I think, oh, I know, one more thing, Liz, just Jody Berger Cardosa, who is the chair of our membership committee, is working on the disability question that we ask on our membership form. And if she hasn't gotten in touch with you, I will ask her to do so. Great. Because anyway, the questions or the comments you just made are relevant to the work that the membership committee is right in the middle of. So I'll connect you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Also, there's a question in the chat, if you don't mind answering there, Jennifer, regarding how SIG co-conveners could also become cluster chairs. So if people are interested in that, I would invite Jennifer Lewis to give us an answer. Those are two different processes in short, but definitely there are people who have done both, as has been mentioned for sure.
Right, the cluster chairs are an extremely important leadership position on the development of the conference program. They do a whole lot behind the scenes. Yeah. I think if usually board members, the conference chair and cluster chairs who are rotating off, it's a 3-year term, may recommend other people, you know, in their cluster field. But if you'd like to send me your name, you know, I'd be happy to put it into the mix. Let me know what cluster you'd be most interested in. And again, it's it's not an application process, but I'd be happy to put your name forth when the conference committee is making those decisions.
Thanks, Jennifer. And just to let you all know, we're running tight on time, but we've been answering your questions along the way. So I hope that's okay that we just keep going with our prepared questions to give our panelists a chance to weigh in. So please keep putting those questions in chat. We'll answer there if we can, or loop it into the conversation as we go, if that works for everybody. So I want to invite Dr. Farber or Nasset to answer the same question about successes and challenges in your experience with your SIG.
Considering the time, I think I mentioned those challenges, so I would like to invite Dr. Farber to add if she wants to add anything.
Well, one of our successes actually, and it was a lot of hard work, is keeping up with people and their interests. Because I remember sitting in our large SIG groups on site at the conference, and we quickly became aware during our introductions that the membership is quite varied, just as the whole concept of immigrants and refugees is very varied in the United States. And you can probably imagine that over the last 4 years, discussion on immigrants and refugees was very varied and challenging given the environment in which we all found ourselves. So one of our successes is the fact that we actually held such large meetings in the last several SWRs, and that people actually made contacts, and many people actually created personal partnership beyond SWR SIGs, and then became basically, apparent very quickly. And this is why actually Mitra's creation of the listserv was so important. Because that way we could keep up with everyone nationally. I mean, having over 100 people trying to keep in contact is quite a challenge. It also takes a considerable amount of time. And so our successes are also our challenges, and that continues. At this point, we have, 4 major subgroups, for example, trying to connect with each other on papers. That is very successful. Evolving into actual publication takes a lot of work on every individual's part to keep in contact with the group, to make fine decisions about how to write a paper, what's going to be in it, what resources you have, what skills people have. All those things are successes, but there are also challenges for them to be able to work. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to also invite Mary. Feel free to contribute to whatever our successes we have that I haven't mentioned.
Thank you so much. In light of time, I'm just going to echo that I think you two have covered them, and the successes are what really has drawn me into the SIG, and I am just honored to be a co-convener, but I don't think I have anything to add.
Great. So my last question, which will probably round out the majority of our remaining time, is actually for each of our representatives to give their top tip, if you will, for people who especially are considering developing a new SIG and they're thinking about those first steps. So if you think about your top tip for that group joining us today, I'd like to actually stay with our immigrant and refugee representatives if I can, and invite you each to give your top tip.
Well, my top tip is you have to be committed to actually want to stay in contact. Because, for example, in academia, depending on your role, that is a real challenge given the demands on our work environment over the last 4 years. So that dedication has to exist within you.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Dr. Nassa, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, that's it. And don't give up. We started with 7 members. We have 145. So just that yeah.
Bravo. Dr. Lightfoot, you want to give us your top tip?
Sure. Sure. I think my big tip, and I've actually started 2 SIGs, and I started the doctoral education one too, and I think it's just do it. Don't, just start it up. I didn't start it up with any big plan. We didn't have anything very well organized at the beginning. It was just a way, and we met and talked about at our SIG meeting what we wanted to do. So I don't think you have, I mean, I might be intimidated listening to some of these other SIGs who are doing so much that you don't have to do all of that at the beginning. And you might not ever want to do it, but it's very easy just to start one up. Just submit your name and you've started one up, and do it and meet people. And then you can figure out how, if you want to go. And I'm sure there's lots of SIGs that have failed too, or not failed, that's a wrong word, but SIGs who decided they didn't want to continue. And so there's nothing lost to start one up.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Dr. Fisher, you want to give us your top tip?
Sure, I would just say, there's no one way to do a SIG. There's no right way to do a SIG. So I've said before that the Q Caucus started out as sort of this one-person show and just used the SIG space as a meeting space. It didn't start out as a SIG. It started out as a separate kind of thing and then evolved into a SIG. And now it's kind of evolved past a SIG and others. So I would say just think about what's best for your particular topic and your particular group. And if you think it might be enough to you meet once a year at SWR and that's enough, and you don't need it to be bigger or more formal than that, then great. But if you think it could be bigger and more formal and you could incorporate advocacy and all of these things, that's great too. You probably need a team of people to help you out, or at least one other person to help you out. But there's no one way to do a SIG.
Awesome, thank you. All right, last but not least, Dr. Trahan, top tip for starting a SIG.
I'd say that our SIG has really been founded in the ability for researchers to do symposium together. And so because that's been such a foundational component of our SIG, I would suggest you start by just going to other people's presentations in your research area and asking them if you can stay in contact with them. And then you can set up a symposium for the following year. And then after you've set up a symposium, then you find other people that are in your research area and you go to their symposium. I mean, basically, it's just kind of building from a grassroots level, presenting together and connecting around research. So it really just starts with going to other people's presentations and then having the courage to say, hey, would you like to stay in contact so that we can present together next year? So that's what I would suggest. Excellent.
Thank you all. I know that there have been some questions floating around about clusters. We've piqued people's interest about clusters. So Jennifer, I don't know if you have a link or anything you might be able to share. People were asking in particular about where they can find a list of the different clusters on the website. Oh, somebody just popped the 2020 clusters in. Thank you. There's a link there. That's great. I also want to say or invite panelists. One thing that I always wished for as a SIG convener, especially when I was getting started, was somebody that I could reach out to ask a question or get ideas like, how the heck do I put together an agenda? Like, what should we be talking about at SWR? Basic stuff like that, things like that. So panelists or anyone else, especially those among our attendees that are more experienced, if you're willing to have a follow-up email or conversation with someone or wants to connect, I certainly will offer myself up to that. I'm putting my email in the chat. And if anybody else, panelists or otherwise, would like to do that to connect afterward, my hope is that this panel is just the beginning of supporting one another, those of us interested in starting, developing, or growing SIGs. And I'd love to find opportunities to collaborate as well. One possibility that I see that I don't think happens very often is to do co-led symposia, perhaps bringing together one or more SIGs or advocacy efforts, as some people have talked about, that I think touch across many of our different areas of interest. So One, I welcome questions. Two, I see other email addresses popping up in the chat if you want to grab people's contact information. And three, I would really welcome feedback in terms of what might be helpful to you all. One thing I've thought about is putting together examples of things like agendas, websites, things like that, so we can take a look at all the good work that everybody's doing and share with each other so that we can benefit from our collective wisdom. And we're just right about time here. I hope you got your question answered, but if you didn't and you want to email me, I will help get you that answer. Otherwise, a huge thank you to our panelists today. This was really fun. I know I picked up some great tips and thoughts, and it was wonderful to see lots of familiar faces and some new friends as well. I appreciate you all taking the time today. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
And sorry. Maybe we want to save the chat or
Yeah.
retrieve it.
Absolutely. I'll grab that. And I'm going to stop the recording.